We had mentioned the objective of life is the struggle between the physical and the spiritual. The physical represents everything which is inclined towards things which are the antithesis of spirituality. Desire, passion, transgression. And we had mentioned it's the tug of war, which exists every moment of our lives. How do we invest that next moment? Do you invest it in our physicality, meaning we're drawn after our physical, or do we use the physical as a means to advance the spiritual? And that's every decision. There's a verse in the Torah where Moshe says to the Jewish people, what is God asking of you? To love him, to revere him, to do his commandments, to walk in his path. That's all that God is asking. That is what man is supposed to do. But it begins, the statement is, in Hebrew, the word mo or ma. What is God asking of you? What is Moshe Rabbeinu introduce? The perspective of life. You should say, God is asking you to do A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. Why is it predicated on the question, what is God asking of you? So the Chofetz Chaim explains that in life, before a person takes any initiative, the question we have to ask, what is God asking of us? Meaning this action, this initiative that I'm going to invest at this moment or take, does it meet the criteria of what God's asking? I mean, when you look through its lens, does it go in the direction of what God is asking or not? And the example we always give, even if you're going to do a mitzvah, does God want you to do this mitzvah at this moment? Maybe God doesn't want you to do the mitzvah. The Talmud tells us that just as there's a mitzvah to say something that should be said, there's a mitzvah to refrain from something which should not be said. For instance, there's a Torah obligation that if a Jew sees another Jew transgressing due to being unaware that it's something he's not permitted to do, we have an obligation to inform the person that he's doing something which is not acceptable. It's a positive commandment. Inform your fellow regarding his behavior, whether it's correct or incorrect, acceptable or unacceptable. Make him aware. But let's say that you're the type of person that by saying something, you cause more damage than good. It's better to remain silent, not to say anything. As there's a mitzvah to say yes and to speak your mind at certain times, there's a mitzvah to refrain. Don't say anything. Because by saying something, you be causing more damage than good. So everything in life, we always have to put under that lens, which is known as, what is God asking? Does it meet the criteria of loving God, fearing God, revering God, doing God's will? Is this what God wants you should do at this moment? Life is a continuous evaluation. We make evaluations continuously. There's a Gemara. The Gemara tells us that if a person sees problems cropping up in his life, whether it's financial, physical, mental, emotional, whatever it may be, things don't just happen by themselves. You should do an introspection. You should introspect. And if you introspect, maybe you're able to identify the cause of why the problem is reoccurring. And the Talmud says, and if you introspected and you did not come upon anything that you think which would cause these issues, you should attribute it to Bittul Torah. That the reason why these things are happening is because you're not studying Torah sufficiently. That's what the Gemara says. That if a person sees suffering, issues, complications, complicating his life, introspect, and if you introspect and you weren't able to identify the cause of it, attribute it to Bittul Torah, that you didn't study Torah sufficiently or appropriately. So the Vilna Gaon asks a question: if the person introspected and you did not come upon it, that means it's not attributed to not studying sufficiently. So if that is the case, why attribute it to not studying sufficiently? Just as not studying sufficiently was an oversight, maybe there was an oversight in some other thing. Maybe it's attributed to something else. How do we know it's attributed to not studying Torah sufficiently? That's the question the Vilna Gaon asks. So my Rosh Hashiva, a blessed memory, used to answer, if a person did not eat kosher, it's a fact. Either it meets the standard of what's kosher or not kosher. You violated the Shabbos. Did you violate? Did you not violate? Did you speak Lashon Hara? Did you not speak Lashon Hara? Did you say something which you should have said or you shouldn't have said? This is all black and white. Now, if a person needs so many hours sleep to be able to maintain yourself, and you sleep that many hours, is there a claim you should have been studying Torah? Or a person has to take out time to eat or to earn a living, and because of that, he's not able to study Torah. Is there a claim you should have been studying Torah? No. We live physical lives. We have to address our responsibilities as a human being or as a Jew. As it says in Pirkei Avos, "Men kemach ein Torah." If there's no kemach, there's no flour, there's no bread, there's no Torah. We're physical beings. We have to assume responsibility for our physicality. Whether you have to earn a living, don't have to earn a living. You have to make time during the day to put on tefillin. A Jew has an obligation to put on tefillin no matter what. A Jew has to say the Shema in time. A Jew, if he's wearing a four-cornered garment, has to wear tzitzis on those four corners. That's black and white. But when it comes to study of Torah, it's a gray area. They won't say it's the Chazon Ish if he studies Musar. If he studies works which somehow sensitize him to God's presence. So the Chazon Ish answered, and we're talking about a man who was a holy man. He invested every fiber of his being in the study of Torah. He said there's certain days when I study itself, the study itself to me is the equivalent of the Musar. That sensitizes it. And the times where I have to spend 3 hours a day studying Musar, because studying the Talmud doesn't do it for him. So it depends on the moment whether he has to study, whether the Gemara is sufficient, or he has to take on time to study specifically Musar works to be able to touch him, to have that level of sensitivity to serve God as he should serve God. But whatever it is, as a human being, we have different needs. The need is not always continuously the same need. A person takes a vacation. You need a vacation. A person's not a machine. So if you take the break to be able to get back and to re-energize, that's not in violation of studying Torah. Of course, that's something you need. So Torah is something which is very interesting. It's the only mitzvah which is determined by your particular predicament. Every other mitzvah is not based on the predicament. You have to observe Shabbos no matter what, whatever your predicament is. You have to eat kosher, whatever your predicament is. You have to put on tefillin, whatever your predicament is. But the study of Torah is based upon to what degree and how and when. That's dependent upon your predicament. There, as a result of that, if you feel and you see that the problems continues to come and don't stop, in terms of everything else, if you didn't come upon the reason, you should have come upon. I didn't. So what I evaluated as not Bittul Torah, because I felt it was legitimate that I took off more time, which I legitimized, maybe it wasn't legitimate. It's something you shouldn't have done. You took off too much time. I'll give you the example. Person works for a company, and you have a 45-minute or half an hour lunch break. Every day, the person takes off, instead of a half an hour, takes off 40 minutes a day. 40 minutes, that means every day you're taking 10 minutes off the company's time where you should be sitting at your desk working. And the person who checks the log, he sees every day, 10 minutes late, back to work. See, he's called in, he says, what's going on? You should have been there. 10 minutes, he says, it's only 10 minutes. What do you mean it's only 10 minutes? You were supposed to work at so many hours a day, and you're supposed to be productive so many hours a day, that's what we're paying you for. If that's the case, we're going to dock you. For those 10 minutes, we're going to take off your salary. But what about those 10 minutes? You're a security guard, and you should be on watch. And during that 10-minute period, there's a breach in the security because you weren't on your watch, because you weren't generating what you should have been generating. We can't make the payment because you didn't generate the profit to be able to make that payment. You have a level of culpability, liability. When we're in this existence, we have responsibility. Responsibility is to be productive and to produce. And that productivity is essential to our whole existence. And you got so many years to produce. And they expect, at the end of the day, a certain degree of accomplishment. And if you figure out and you understand and you do the time valuation, how many years of not studying did you not study because minutes and hours accumulate, and you have months and you have years? Well, you should have been studying, but it's only a month a year. A month a year, if you live 70 years, that means it's 70 times a month. And on that time, every minute you study. Do you study a minute, or you only study 40 seconds of that minute? Qualitatively, how do you invest it? After everything's said and done, how much time have you really given to your objective, to your purpose when you're here in this existence? But that's the challenge of life. To see it clearly and to maximize. And even if we fail, to make the correction when we can't make the correction. You know, you'd say, no, that's a tall order. That's a tall order. You know, it's interesting. If you're in the army and you have certain responsibilities, you better meet those responsibilities. And if you don't, there are very serious consequences. Because as they used to say, you're in the army now. That's it. When you're conscripted in the army, you're bound to whatever the protocol they tell you you're bound to. There's no free time. You only have free time when they give you the free time. Life, you have no free time. Life is a responsibility. It's interesting. In life, the only thing we can regain is time. You lose time, you can't make it up. Because every minute of life has its value. And the moment you pass on time, whatever you're supposed to accomplish with that previous time, the new time you have, you're supposed to accomplish something else, so that you could never catch up the moment we speak about wasting time. And if you put it in that lens, time takes on another dimension of value, of importance. You know, you're studying to be a doctor, a financial degree, a lawyer. What qualifies you to be qualified in any of these fields? Knowledge. So there, the value of the education is the knowledge, and only that you are able to know what you're supposed to know to be whatever you're meant to be. The time is not the issue. A person has to go to 4 years to undergraduate school, or whatever the time is. Why 4 years? Because in 4 years, there's definitely enough time to study the courses that you need to get an undergraduate degree. But you want to know something? What happens if you have a type of system? You just have to come and take the exams, and if you pass them with a sufficient grade, you graduate undergraduate degree. The person could have studied 5 minutes a year. As long as you have the knowledge, there the objective is the end game. Could you pass the exam? Do you have knowledge or don't you have knowledge? That's what it's all about. That's what an education is all about. But in terms of life as a Jew, it's not the end game. The end game is every minute is the end game. Every minute, it's not only what you know, it's how you utilize your life. Therefore, it's much more complicated. What's the difference between a Noahide and a Jew? A non-Jew and a Jew. A non-Jew is bound by the 7 Noahide laws. What are the 7 Noahide laws? 6 of them are negative commandments, and one is to establish a judicial system. Don't kill, don't steal, don't commit adultery, incest, don't blaspheme God, don't do idolatry, and don't eat a limb off a living animal. Doesn't sound too complicated. The rest of your life, you could sit and do anything you want. You could whittle away your life and do nothing. Your life, your time is yours. That's the life of a non-Jew. Even vis-a-vis God. God said it's okay. As long as you don't behave like a bad boy. And what's a bad boy within these parameters? The world is yours. You want to be indulged sexually, as long as it's not adultery, incest, you're permitted. You want to gouge yourself and live like a hedonistic animal, as long as you don't infringe on anybody else's rights, and you don't steal, and you don't harm someone else, it's your right as a human being. You can live like an intellectual animal from dawn to dusk, 24 hours a day. Not a problem. A Jew is a different story. A Jew, every moment of our life, whether it's our action, whether it's our speech, whether it's our mind, has to be invested in what God tells us we have to be invested in. And that's what happened at Sinai. God offers us the Torah. We had a level of clarity. I always give the example. The person has what it takes. At one time, and he's offered a position to be the chairman of the board of General Motors. And he's going to earn a very sizable salary with profit sharing, plus experience. Besides the fame and the honor and the relationships you're going to be able to create because you're in that position of authority and power. But you realize it has a very serious time commitment. If you assume that position and you want to succeed, you're committed 24 hours a day, all the years you're going to be in that position. And even when you're on vacation, you have to be on call because you may have to be consulted. Another person says, so I prefer to pass on it. No, thank you. I prefer to work in a post office, 9 to 5. I get my retirement. I got my hour of lunch, and I could talk to my fellow coworker, and he wears his baseball cap that it says Postal Service, and and you can even siphon gas off the truck and put it in your own car every once in a while. Not a problem. Easy. Be chairman of the board of General Motors. Who needs it? Go bowling with the guys once a week. And you'll have your towel around your neck, and you'll get your bowling bag with the bowling ball. And you belong to the league. A person who has an understanding of purpose and accomplishment, and he can do that, is he going to pass on that opportunity? Well, opportunity similar to that? Of course not. But it's responsibility. Who wants responsibility? But what's life? Life is responsibility. Life is accomplishment. Life is purpose. It's not sitting and doing nothing. That's what it's about. And for the Jew more than anyone, you have no choice. You live for purpose. And if you don't address that purpose, there's liability. A person doesn't eat and maintain his physical system. What happens? He becomes malnourished. The body begins withering. The system starts shutting down. The Jew has a soul that unless you maintain those systems through infusions of spirituality, which only God knows what they are, which he gave us, which is called Torah and mitzvos, our spirituality withers. It's no different, exactly the same thing. At the end of the day, as a doctor could make an evaluation why the person's internal organs are not functioning properly because they were abused or they were neglected, looking at a Jew's soul, God says, the soul is not where it should be. Because if it would have had the proper infusion, it'd be a different dimension of soul. Identically the same. However, there's a partnership. The soul cannot function without a body, and the body cannot function without a soul. There's a partnership. It's fused together to function in one of two ways, to be challenged. Either you do what you're supposed to be doing, meaning, as we mentioned yesterday, spiritualizing the physical, or neglecting the spiritual and living only the physical and not addressing the spiritual. That's the challenge of life. Now, the soul in its own right is a spiritual entity. The Or HaChaim HaKadosh writes in one location, we know that fire and water cannot coexist. Just as fire and water cannot coexist, he says to put the soul and infuse it in the body is more difficult than having fire and water coexist. We're talking about something which is totally spiritual, which has no relevance to the physical world. And yet God somehow makes a connection, connects the soul to the body, that they function as one entity. How's it possible? Well, nothing's beyond God's ability. But within the realm of reality, it's an impossibility. God overrides that reality because he wills the soul should go into the body, although it has unlimited capacity. And with the soul, what it should do, the moment it goes into the body, because of its innate intensity of holiness, it should purify and refine the body instantaneously. We just celebrated Pesach. If you had a vessel that was used for chametz, leavened, let's say you had a pizza tray, and you made pizza on it. The dough of pizza is called leaven. It's chametz. You're not permitted to use that pizza tray for Pesach. Because if you do, what's absorbed in that material, that metal, will be absorbed into the food you eat on Pesach. And you're not permitted because it's called chametz. Now, but it could be purged. How do you purge it? Because it's not, the absorption doesn't come through liquid or through water. The only way you could extract what's absorbed in that metal, you have to heat it to a point where the metal becomes red hot. Because when it becomes red hot, anything absorbed inside that metal is totally vaporized. It's not an extraction process, it's a vaporization process. You vaporize whatever's contained within that metal, within that material. You understand? That's what happens. Because the intensity heat penetrates the metal, that whatever's absorbed in that metal cannot withstand that temperature. When that metal turns red hot, it's turned to ash, it's vaporized. The intensity of the soul is so immeasurably holy. When it goes into the physicality of the body does not have the capacity to withstand the holiness of the soul. You know what should happen to the body? Immediately, it should be refined and purified and sanctified. But if that happens, there's no challenge. So what's the challenge of life? So how do we work it out? There's no balance any longer. There's no struggle. So the Ramchal writes, based on the Zohar, what God does, he suppresses the innateness of the soul when he puts it into the body. That the soul only has a certain degree of influence to a point where there's an equilibrium between the soul and the body. And now you're both at a certain starting point, and the tug war starts. So although the soul in its innateness should overwhelm the physicality of the body, but because God suppresses its innate characteristics, it's not able to do it for that reason. What happens after a person dies? He dies and the soul departs. When the soul leaves the body, it expands to what it's supposed to be, and it's magnified infinite times over what it was in the body. Because now there's no reason to suppress it any longer. And therefore, it magnifies everything holy once it's released from that body. So at the time of resurrection, when God will resurrect the dead, and that magnified soul, which it has borders on the infinite, goes into that physicality of the body, immediately it will spiritualize it and overwhelm it. And as the Torah tells us, Moshe Rabbeinu, he radiated holiness when he came down from heaven after he received the Torah. It will not be comparable to what the body would look like after the soul is reinfused at the time of resurrection. Because the soul now will demonstrate and reflect everything that it is, which is this unlimited entity, especially after it lived its life and made sufficient choices that it is at an accomplished level for that reason. You know, the law is a Jew is not permitted to be buried in a non-Jewish cemetery. It's a law. It was ordained at Sinai that a Jew is not permitted to be buried within a non-Jewish cemetery. And if a Jew is buried in a non-Jewish cemetery, they have to create a separation between the grave of the Jew and the grave of the non-Jew. So if, let's say you would build a wall, let's say you have a cemetery, and you have a non-Jewish section and Jewish section, either there's a distance of land separating or you build a wall. The wall separates. Now, what's it all about? So the Talmud discusses a story that there was a war and a person was a casualty, and he fell into a pit right next to the grave of one of the prophets. There's a Jew falling into a pit right next to one of the graves of the prophets. It's inappropriate. A person of that caliber, an ordinary person, should be buried next to a prophet. So the Gemara tells us, you know what happened? God brought that person back to life immediately. And he ran a few feet further and he dropped. That he should not be buried within 4 cubits of that prophet, because it would be disgraceful for that ordinary person to be buried next to the prophet, because it's a different dimension. Because the tzaddik, even after he passes away, his remains are holy, because those remains are the equivalent. If you have a Sefer Torah and you have a mantle, you have the mantle on the outside, and that mantle now becomes worn. What are you supposed to do with the mantle? You're supposed to bury it. Why are you supposed to bury it? Because that mantle served the Holy Scroll. It was the so-called the receptacle for the scroll. The body of a tzaddik is a receptacle for that holy soul. Therefore, the body, although it's physical, it's a holy entity, even after one's demise. The body of a Jew, because the body is the receptacle for the soul, the dimension of the soul of a Jew and a non-Jew, a different dimension of soul. It's a receptacle for a different type of, it stores something totally different. So to bury a non-Jew with that receptacle is a receptacle of a soul, but that soul is of no comparison to the soul of a Jew. Therefore, it's inappropriate that these two receptacles should be next to one. I'll give you an example. You have a mezuzah case. What do you do with a mezuzah case if you can no longer use it? You're supposed to bury it. And you have a case, a bullet case, and you want to put both cases next to one another. You say, this is a case and that's a case. Each one's a receptacle. One holds bullets, the other one holds a mezuzah. Do you equate one to the other? Well, I can't use the mezuzahs. I'll put bullets in that case. It's inappropriate. Since that receptacle is used for a mezuzah, which is a holy scroll, a holy entity, it's considered disgraceful. Once it was used for that, cannot be used for anything of lesser dimension. The same thing. The body of a Jew and the body of a non-Jew, it's a receptacle of a different reality. Therefore, a Jew and non-Jew are not permitted to be buried in the same separate cemetery for the same reason, unless there's a separation of distance of land, or you put a wall between them to separate one from another for that reason. But it's only because what we represent in life and even after death. And the body ultimately is going to be resurrected. The Talmud tells us that if a person's present, when a person's soul departs from him, he has to rent his garments. Even though that Jew is not related to you whatsoever. If a person's in the hospital by the bedside of a Jew, and the Jew is passing away, and you're there and you watch the monitor go down to a straight line, the Jew who witnesses this has to tear his clothing, rent his garments at the time of the passing. Why? So the Talmud tells us, because a Jew, when he passes away, if a person, God forbid, we see a Sefer Torah being burnt, you have to rent your garments. Because it's so tragic. Because something which is of such a nature of holiness is being destroyed and going out of existence. To express your level of pain, you have to rent your garments. When the soul of a Jew leaves his body and is no longer functional as what it's meant to be, and it goes out of this existence, the pain, the tragic moment, you have to rent your garments, the same thing. That's only a Jew, a Jewish soul. Because the Jewish soul has a certain specific purpose. It has minimally the holiness of a Sefer Torah, the soul of a Jew. and therefore you have to rent your garments for that reason. Just to give you an understanding, it's interesting. It's cited in the early commentators, people, they call children with certain nicknames which express their feeling of love, and sometimes the names are inappropriate. A child is not trained, so they would call him a certain name in whatever, in Yiddish or in Hebrew. Of course, he wets his pants, his diaper. So the early commentators say calling a child by that name is inappropriate. Why? Because since the child has a soul and the child is holy, how do you refer to a holy being with such a name? It's inappropriate. Could you imagine a person's a prince of the greatest king in the world, greatest level of royalty, and you go and refer to that little prince who's 1 year old with a cute name, which indicates that he's not toilet trained yet. It's not appropriate. That's not the way you refer to a prince. The child, even as a child, has that soul. It's the same soul. It hasn't yet been perfected, expanded, advanced. Its potential hasn't been met, but it's the same soul. Just to give you an understanding of what the innateness of a Jew is, and because of that innateness, what the objective and the purpose, and why every moment of our lives has that special value, and it has to be invested as we're supposed to invest it.